Over the last year, I've worked with lots of different businesses in the e-com space, so big supermarkets, online fashion retailers, physical stores, startup, enterprise, multi-brand, mono-brand, so a whole raft of different businesses. But actually there's 4 key themes they all keep asking us about. So really I thought it'd be quite interesting to explore those, look at some data around them, and those are like how to save costs, so cost saving within technology and associated areas. Loyalty programs, because they're all the rage at the moment. Everyone's implementing loyalty programs, updating loyalty programs. MINDERA is doing a lot of work in that space. Also looking at in-store tech as well, so actually what trends are we seeing with implementation of in-store tech, and which ones are working particularly well, and how does AI fit into all of it. And one of the things that struck me as I've been having these conversations is how interrelated they all are. So people are introducing AI to save costs, they're introducing AI into their loyalty programs, and AI is playing a key part in in-store tech. And then obviously loyalty is there to save money on marketing, so if you're instead of paying to acquire customers all the time, actually you can introduce a loyalty program and therefore you can retain your customers. So there's this really interesting interrelationship between cost saving, loyalty, in-store tech and AI. So the first question is, why do businesses need to save cost at the moment? And the big one is lack of growth. So retail in the UK only grew 0.7% last year. I think the last quarter was 0.1%. But it's still overall down 3.7% against 2021. So for anyone who is in board meetings over the last 2 years, people weren't going, oh, let's try and grow 0.7% over the next year. People have much bigger targets than that, and inevitably when you don't hit your growth targets, you start looking at cost saving to improve your profitability. So this is retail growth from the Office of National Statistics over the last few years. It is a bit UK centric, but actually I think it probably applies to a lot of the other areas we work as well. We're also seeing increased competition, particularly from outside of the country, so particularly from China. So remember that 0.7% as an average growth, then you look at a Chinese business like Shein and you look at its 40% growth last year. Clearly it's hoovering up market share across the world. Its UK sales in 2024 were around 2 billion. That's the same as Apple's UK retail sales. So fast fashion manufacturer, direct-to-consumer marketplace from China is doing the same kind of revenue as Apple in the UK. And that's huge, and that has a knock-on effect on businesses in the UK as well. People trade down to cheaper price points. That affects UK businesses. So they're clearly not getting the 0.7% growth, they're getting much bigger growth than that. Another reason to save cost is increased costs. So most businesses, based on a survey, feel like the costs are going up. You know, things like national insurance are going to affect businesses. So when costs go up, you want to save costs. The way people are saving costs are in 3 areas, so licensing costs, staffing costs and marketing costs. This is a bit of a circuitous point, but if you look at any study as to whether people prefer Teams or Slack, any kind of data on it, Slack always outperforms Teams. People always prefer working with Slack, usually just a little bit, usually not a lot. But Teams has massively outperformed Slack because it's cheaper, because it comes free with products. So this isn't a case of the best product wins, this is a case of the cheapest product wins. And that's because businesses are cost sensitive, and you can see that cost sensitivity increasing over time. Another thing we're seeing at MINDERA is people moving from expensive SaaS solutions to cheaper SaaS solutions, so Shopify being probably one of the most cost-effective solutions for e-commerce. By their own studies, I reckon it's about 1/3 cheaper than alternatives. That is their own study, so take it for what it is, but we are certainly seeing that play out as well. So a business that's implementing and running Shopify is spending a hell of a lot less on their e-commerce than one on some of the more traditional big players. And that comes through again in the data we see. So lots of small businesses obviously use it, so over 1/3 of the UK's e-commerce sites are run on that platform. So huge data around that. Businesses are also saving money by reducing staffing costs. There's a straightforward way of reducing staffing costs, which is laying off staff. So we're again seeing a bit of an uptick there. Not loads, but it is up year on year. And this is number of redundancies per 1,000 employees in the UK. So again, seeing an increase in redundancies. We're also seeing businesses use tooling to replace staff. So there's lots of really interesting articles around Klarna where they're letting natural attrition take its course, so not making people redundant, but they're not replacing them because they reckon AI is able to pick up that slack. Klarna's an interesting business because they have an app that basically
uses bots to place orders on different websites, and obviously when those websites change they need to update the bots, but they're using AI to do that, and therefore they're saving a lot of money on staffing costs. And we'll see more and more of this. I think Klarna is just one of the early adopters because of their particular technology needs, but I think we'll see AI allow businesses to do more with less. And MINDERA also, a big reason people come to us is to save cost on staffing, so either nearshoring or offshoring. It's not as straightforward as looking at the day rates, but I think we can see from our own data that overall it's cheaper to run technology from cheaper locations. And then the final point is basically get rid of staff in stores. So we're seeing pretty much every retailer in the UK allows self-checkout, so you don't need nearly as many staff when you're doing self-checkout. So that's the kind of staffing. And then in terms of marketing, what's interesting is everyone says they're reducing their direct marketing spend. So all the businesses we speak to say, we're spending less on PPC. But when you look at the annual reports of Meta and Google, people are spending more on PPC. So that one doesn't add up from what people are saying to what is showing in Google and Meta's reports. That might be because Google and Meta are growing a lot in emerging markets like Africa, and that's picking up the slack, maybe, probably not. So I think there's still a lot of PPC spend, but what is interesting is it's shifting. So that data from the previous slide, you can't see it here, it's too kind of zoomed out. But when you look at it in detail, what you're seeing is social media, just between Meta and Google, is gaining 3% of the market share of Google in just 2 years. We haven't got data for TikTok because it's a private company, they don't publish their annual reports, but studies have shown that 51% of young women basically start their search on TikTok, not on Google. So social media is really growing in prevalence, and we're seeing that being a big area that people are focused on from a marketing perspective. So again, we'll see probably a pullback in PPC spend on those traditional sources like Google and an increase in social media sources. We're also seeing, because of the rise of social media, a bit of a death in on-site content. So the few businesses we work with that still have deep editorial content on site, it represents usually between 0.1 and 0.2% of their traffic, and typically people spend less than a minute on that long form content, which is typically less than the average page on their site. So famous brands like Net-a-Porter that had the edit, which was their kind of content and commerce, they've dropped that now, so there's no longer an edit on Net-a-Porter from a sort of editorial perspective. So again, we're seeing people pulling costs away on some of these things like editorial content. And an increase in loyalty programs, so people want to spend less acquiring customers, spend more retaining customers, so we're seeing this increase in loyalty programs. That leads into loyalty. So obvious reasons to have one is it's cheaper to retain than buy customers. This is a very old study, it's often quoted even now, and it's actually an old study, so take it with a pinch of salt, but I think it's reasonable to assume that the point is still valid, i.e. it's cheaper to retain than acquire. The other big reason why we see a growth in loyalty programs is to get access to that rich data. So having first-party data about your customers' behaviour, particularly in store, obviously you can track it online. When somebody walks around a store, you have no notion around sort of what's happening. So loyalty programs are a way to get access to that data, because when they check out with a loyalty card, you can attribute their sales to them. So who is leading from a loyalty perspective? Well, the two businesses that have the best loyalty according to studies are businesses that don't have loyalty programs. So Apple very clearly doesn't have a loyalty program. Amazon, I would argue, doesn't have a loyalty program. It has a product called Prime that you pay for and you get something in return for it, but some people call that a loyalty program. So I think a loyalty program doesn't necessarily need to be there to have loyalty. You can have loyalty without it, but there are different approaches. So the kind of types of approach people take are to not have a loyalty program, and again, lots of big brands here that don't do loyalty. Then you can have what I'd call a buy-in scheme, which is what you see from Amazon Prime. So you pay some money, you get some preferential treatment, whether that's delivery related or other benefits, or the sort of more traditional earn points, get discounts type of program. In terms of what customers want from loyalty programs, there's an interesting survey here which looks at basically of the different benefits, what are customers most interested in. And the US and EU follow a pretty similar pattern, with APAC having a slightly different profile, but for the most part people want tangible benefits. So they want to be able to get things at a better price, they want to be able to get currency, they want to be able to get discounts, these first two columns, and then they're sort of in varying degrees interested in this other stuff like benefits from third parties, personalised content, free content, experience, etc. APAC's a little bit different, they're much more interested in benefits with partner businesses, and they're much more interested in things like experiences. But yeah, so there is a different trend depending on the area, but they're the kind of benefits that consumers want from their loyalty programs. In terms of the cost of running a program, a study by UK government and Which found that 10% of products in loyalty programs with different prices were artificially sort of increased. So, hey, this product is now £4, we'll drop it down to £3, even though it was £3 last week. So that's only 10% of products. They found that on average, products in loyalty programs with different pricing based off of those 5 supermarkets were 17 to 25% cheaper. So that gives you a sense of what it costs to implement these loyalty programs from a sort of cost to run it. In terms of their marketing budget that goes to it, this has gone up year on year, sort of quite significantly each year. So it's gone from about 21% a few years ago to about a third almost of marketing budget is spent on loyalty programs. So you can see businesses that we interact with, but also the data shows are focused on loyalty programs. There's a big focus there from businesses on it. In terms of whether to build or buy one, we see a pretty even split, and so slightly more people build their own than buy. And if you look at the satisfaction, people are slightly more satisfied when they buy versus build, but actually it's pretty even across both. In terms of whether they work, customers actually say that they don't influence how they shop. Again, that's what customers say. Whether that's true or not is another matter, but it does make them think about pricing a little bit more. I think what you can also see in the data is that all the UK supermarkets, apart from one, have a loyalty program. So if they didn't work, you probably wouldn't see quite such widespread adoption of loyalty programs. So all the businesses in red have a loyalty program now. So Aldi is the outlier. So that leads into, obviously we talked about loyalty programs. A big part of it is to get access to that data as well. So how does that sync with in-store tech? How prevalent is it? What good in-store tech are we seeing? Who's winning? Who's losing? So if we go on to in-store tech, 96% of stores have self-checkout, so super prevalent. Generally, customers prefer it actually to registers. So huge adoption over a relatively short space of time in this kind of self-checkout in-store tech. In terms of the different types of tech, there's a few nuances here, but you've got the standard like go up to a till, scan it and pay, so self-service. We're seeing a real big rise in what I'd call bring your own device, which is basically using your device to do a lot of the scanning, using your device to do a lot of the checking out. You've got some really innovative technology like Amazon's Go stores, where you basically scan your palm on the way in, it knows who you are, it's linked to your credit card, you wander around, grab all your products and you walk out, and it knows what you picked up through a mix of computer vision, etc. More recently, Amazon have implemented their Just Walk Out technology at NFL stadiums for like getting drinks and stuff, and they're using a bit of RFID, so they're kind of blending the next category. But that's obviously very innovative tech. And then you've got some businesses using RFID, so radio frequency identification, tag up the products, and then you could do things like Uniqlo being a good example. You just put all your products in the basket and it goes, here are the 23 or 2 or 5 products you put in, and you pay and you walk out. Decathlon do it as well. So they're the different types of tech. In terms of what customers like, the Just Walk Out tech by Amazon, most people aren't willing to pay more for it, so most people aren't willing to pay more to save time. And Amazon Go technology is really expensive to implement. You've got to put cameras everywhere, you've got to have tons and tons of servers that are processing lots and lots of data. It's multi-million pound implementation. So I think actually what we're going to see is that tech doesn't work. And Amazon haven't rolled it out to all the Amazon Go stores. So I think we'll see that fade away pretty quickly. And consumers feel the same, right? So they think that it doesn't solve more problems than it introduces. What we do see working really well is RFID. So customers are 95% more satisfied with an RFID checkout than a normal self-checkout. They're pretty satisfied with the normal self-checkout. So I think there's definitely a clear winner when using RFID. Obviously, it's also expensive to implement, so it's not a quick thing. One of the things you get with RFID, though, is ancillary benefits. So businesses where they've implemented it can find like almost a 90% reduction in labour costs in their DC inventory cycle checking. This is where you basically make sure that your stock matches your system. And it's so much quicker to do with RFID because you're just scanning things rather than like picking stuff up and pressing barcodes. So in-store tech we're seeing increasing, and one of the big reasons again is this sort of loyalty data capture piece. So when you check out in a store, what reason have you got for giving them your identity? None, unless there's a loyalty program. So you introduce a loyalty program that lets you do data capture, and in return you can do things like personalization with AI. So we start to see AI come into the mix. So thinking about AI, we're going to look a little bit at that. So in terms of where it's at now, one thing I like to ask people is like, think of an example where AI has saved a business. So where has AI been implemented in a business that was failing, and they've implemented it, and now all of a sudden it's succeeding, it's outcompeting its competitors. I can't actually think of a business that's implemented AI in a transformational way. I can think of lots of positive ROI use cases, and actually in academia and medicine there's even more cases for AI. It's very, very powerful. But it's not quite transformational yet. And it's been around for a long time. Like, we saw the first Gen AI models in 2009, we saw computer vision outperform humans in 2011, so that was a study looking at traffic lights. AI was better at identifying red, green, amber than people back in 2011. So this isn't a new technology, so why then is it not more prevalent? And I think part of the big reason is cost. So one thing we do at MINDERA with our clients is take them through this assessment framework, which is really super simple, which looks at, okay, of these 5 factors, how do you score yourself on from weaker to stronger? So do you have lots and lots of data around the subject that you can use to train the model? If the answer is no, you're going to not be able to train the model. It's going to be quite hard to do AI. Can you access that data? And this is a pretty classic problem. So lots of businesses might have data, but if it's fragmented, if it's in third-party systems, they can't get at it. Again, it becomes quite hard to do something with AI. Then, do you own the delivery system? So again, if you're using a third-party checkout, they implement your software and you want to bring some AI into that software, you've got to work with that third party. It starts to become a bit more complicated as a project. Can you gather feedback on whether the AI is successful or not? So things that are binary answers or things that are percentage answers are good for AI. So is that true or false, or what percentage chance is that of being right? And you can gather feedback through customers going, yeah, that's right, no, that's not. Then if you can train it well, that's a good use case, but that's not always the case. And then how do you manage its drift? So over time, if you've got an AI model trying to optimize itself, you need to be able to know that it's optimizing itself positively, not negatively. So have you got the ability to do that? And again, part of that is making sure that you've got those feedback loops. And as you go through, you might score yourself. And if businesses score very highly, then the viability of building AI for that particular problem is good. Then of course you want to look at the business case as well, as to work out whether it makes sense from a cost to benefit perspective. But equally, if there's a lot of things down on the left, and even just like 1 or 2 down on this weaker side, probably a non-starter, and that's quite a lot of different areas for businesses to get right. So that's one of the reasons why it's perhaps not as prevalent, particularly in small to medium-sized businesses. In very small businesses, you see it being very prevalent. We're using off-the-shelf tooling. In very large businesses, it's prevalent, but you've got this kind of U-shaped curve where medium-sized businesses struggle with some of that. In terms of use cases, so a couple of years ago, we mapped out a load of use cases in retail and mapped them to like, how hard is it to implement versus how much value do you get? And I went and redid the exercise for today, so almost 2 years later, sort of 18 months later, and stuff hasn't moved that much. Stuff has come down in terms of effort, so actually all the advances we've seen in media have reduced the effort of some of these, and some of them the value's gone up, a couple actually went back, but we still see it being, a not straightforward scenario. So there are some quick wins, there are some long-term strategic options, there are some things that are fine but aren't going to transform anyone's world, and then there's some riskier investments, and there's some examples over there that I could spend a long time talking and going through. And I think for a lot of businesses it's working out what their view of this looks like, because this is a generic view, and actually every business will be a little bit different. But I think when it comes to AI, understanding the use cases and mapping them to sort of value to effort is a useful exercise. At MINDERA, we've also done a study on coding assistants. So we're still doing quite a long-running study with multiple engineers going every day, line by line, as to what AI suggested and what they accepted and what they didn't accept, and surveying the team as well. So overall, people who are in the study are really positive. So 60% felt like they were learning more. And these aren't like junior engineers, these are often a mixed team, more senior. They felt like they were writing better code as well, which again for senior engineers is quite a strong endorsement. And the survey data was all positive. There was very little negative, there was a lot of neutral, but overall it was more positive. So of the 40,000 suggestions made by AI, about 32% were accepted, so a relatively decent amount. And of 82,000 lines of code that were suggested, 27,000 were accepted. And this is across a couple of different clients, a couple of different teams. So actually I think what the data shows from a coding assistance perspective is AI is helping us. AI is making developers' lives easier, they're enjoying using it, it's making them more productive. It's not like solving loads of problems instantly. You're only accepting a third of what it's suggesting, but it is helping. In one team, they were able to get a 30% increase in test coverage from 50 to 80% in just three sprints. We found that only really applied to back end, it didn't apply to front end. It wasn't very good at improving test coverage in the front end, but for back end code, actually AI is really helpful for generating testing. So where do we get to? Well, I think in terms of thinking about using AI, where it's commoditized, so things like coding assistant, things like image recognition, things like price optimization, telling you what the right price is based on elasticity, telling you what attributes a product has, or whether traffic lights are red, amber, green, helping source code. Like, those are commodities, and I think they make a lot of sense. Where I think AI is not there yet is things that are a bit more out there, a bit harder to score highly on that framework. So things like perfectly personalizing something to somebody. And one of the reasons we don't see that working really well is it's quite hard to get lots of data about somebody. So, particularly in something like fashion, you might buy 2 or 3 times from one store, you might buy a few different products. Over a couple of years, that's like 6 or 7 purchases. Actually, it's still quite hard to personalize something based on 6 purchases. And that's assuming you can attribute all the data to that person, you've got all those other things solved. So we're not seeing that like smashing it, albeit there are some good use cases. Things like forecasting, again, it's really hard to understand macroeconomic trends and wider contexts. So most businesses aren't able to get AI to solve forecasting radically better than their finance team. And things like virtual try-on, which you might think generative AI can do a really good job of try and close on virtually, actually it causes more problems than it solves at the moment because things start to look wrong or the wrong size. So that's, I think, where the state of AI is. The question really is, when will these get there? Will these get there next year? Will it be the year after? I don't necessarily have the answer to that. So that's pretty much the end. The 4 takeaways for me were like lean teams, often nearshore, using AI, are basically delivering more for less. So we're seeing a big sort of focus on that area, and we'll see, I think, a decline in some of these big enterprise SaaS vendors that charge like £1 million licensing fees a year. I think they're going to come to an end over the next few years. We're seeing more and more complex loyalty programs being worked on and being launched, both proactively to gain customers, gain share of wallet, but also defensively because competition are doing it as well. So it's not just hey, there's an opportunity, we should launch a loyalty program. There's also a bit of, oh crap, all of our competitors have got loyalty programs, we need to do that, otherwise we'll lose customers to them. And more so, they're linking it to in-store experiences and they're linking it to AI. So we're seeing those loyalty programs weave personalization, and we're seeing those loyalty programs trigger for different events in store, like going to restaurants, etc. Over the next few years, we're going to see this big push for bring your own device technology in stores. So we're going to be seeing businesses more and more encouraging us to scan in store and check out in store on our phones. Obviously, it's radically cheaper for them, and they get more data capture as you're going around, like what you're scanning. Maybe you didn't buy something, you scanned it, thought about buying it, then you put it back and traded it for something else. They'll get all that data. So I think a number of businesses we work with are really keen on how do we drive more of this type of behaviour rather than somebody comes to the till, we ask them for their email, they give us the wrong email, we type it in wrong, that doesn't work. And then on the AI front, I think it's still gaining maturity. It can be used to differentiate with investment when it meets enough of the criteria of our assessment framework. So actually, if the stars align, it can help drive businesses forward. But that's relatively rare. I think where it is worth using is where it's commoditized. So where it's an established problem like coding, image recognition, price optimization, those kind of things. So that's it.
Thank you all for
Thanks, Dan.